Hello, good evening and welcome.
What a privilege, Sir David.
So am I. A faith question just at the beginning, and then we'll go right back to the beginning. But Chief Rabbi, do you believe in God, or do you know there's a God?
I think I know there's a God. The great news is, I think he believes in us, which is much more important than our believing in him.
Yeah. Actually, what's your first memory? How old were you? The first thing you can ever remember?
Well, I'll tell you, for the first 2 years of my life, we lived together with my grandparents in a big, extended family in Seven Sisters Road opposite Finsbury Park. And my late grandfather was wasn't a professional rabbi, he was in the wine business, but he had his own synagogue, he actually owned it. And our wonderful head of LL was telling us, General Shkedi, about the Torah Scroll, which is our most holy object. And when we finished reading it, we wind it up and wrap it in its mantle. And as Frumkin's grandson, I was given the special role. My father used to lift me up when I was 2 years old, and I put the bells on the Torah Scroll. And that is my first memory, and I think, if you've got grandchildren, lift them up and put the bells on, and your children may be Chief Rabbis as well.
When did you decide you'd like to be a rabbi? Or was it slow, or was it very
slow? It was very slow. We were already married, Elaine and I already had a career at teaching secular philosophy. And something, just burned in me to get involved in Jewish life. So I was 25 before I started studying for the rabbi.
So you were on the road at that point, as it were.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. And how did you meet Elaine?
Well, I think we have to share this fascinating piece of divine providence. Sir David and I went to the same college in Cambridge, Gonville and Keys. And because I did quite well in my first year's exams, they gave me a very special privilege for my second year, which was to spend that year in the rooms that you had as an undergraduate. The good news was there were magnificent rooms with huge, wonderful French windows looking out on the croquet lawn. The bad news is I spent the whole year playing croquet and nearly failed my exams that year. In my third year, a friend called Philip Skelko, just joined us from Oxford. Philip became a head teacher, a very, very outstanding one. Saw two young ladies who had just come up to Cambridge, and we decided to invite them. And I did something for the first and last time in my life. I cooked a chicken. Now, there's a Yiddish saying that goes, about the little village shtetl in the 19th century. If a poor man eats a chicken, one of them is ill. I added my little rider to it, which is if Sachs has cooked the chicken, everyone is ill. So the young lady who ate my chicken and survived was Elaine. And 3 weeks later, I proposed to her, and it was the best thing I've done in my entire life.
What would be your definition of love? Human love, so.
Well, love is giving. Love is forgiving. Actually, we have this division of labor. I do the sinning and Elaine does the forgiving. But I think, love between husband and wife, between parents and children, are the most sacred things in Judaism. We know that every culture has a rule that says, do unto others as they would do to you. Principle of justice. But the principle of love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love the stranger. That comes into Western civilization through Judaism. So it is that kind of love between husband and wife that all the prophets saw as the relationship between God and the Jewish people. It's that bond, unbreakable bond of loyalty.
Actually, I remember I once asked Richard Burton that question. What is your definition of love? And he said, love is staying awake all night with a sick child or a very healthy adult. What's been the happiest moment in your 22 years?
Well, Sir David, I think today has not been a bad one. Because today, 20 years ago, and it was a key moment of my Chief Rabbi, I launched a campaign and wrote a book called Will We Have Jewish Grandchildren? And this afternoon, our youngest child gave birth to her first child. And that for me... You know, in Judaism, family and the home are very, very sacred things. So, you know, the love that brings new life into the world, the delight and joy we've had from our children and now from our 7 grandchildren. I mean, these are the really happy moments.
Absolutely. And in fact, back in 1994, you wrote a piece which was headed, Will We Have Jewish Grandchildren?
Yeah.
And, well, we have the grandchildren, as we know now. But so maybe we should make the question, will we have Jewish great-grandchildren? What's the future in that sense of Jewishness?
I tell you, David, the great privilege of these 22 years has been being part, tiny little part of a Jewish community that really has transformed itself. The United Synagogue has become completely transformed. In the old days, synagogue was a place where you went to pray, and not terribly often as well. I love the story, you know, we have on tabernacles, we put up this temporary booth for 8 days. And I heard this is a true story from a synagogue in South Africa, that they got a team of workmen to put up this temporary dwelling, this booth, this hut, for our Festival of Tabernacles. And the workmen were fascinated. What were they building? So they asked the person who knew most about Judaism, which was always the synagogue caretaker. So he explained to the workers about this Festival of Tabernacles. And the workers turned to the caretaker and they said, you mean to say we're putting all this up for just 8 days? And the caretaker turned and pointed to the synagogue and said, that's nothing. They put that up for 3 days a year. So our synagogues, which tended to be 3 days a year or 1 day a week, have now become 7 days a week community centres. We've built more Jewish day schools in the last 22 years.
Well, that's probably perhaps your greatest achievement, what's happened there.
I think it's incredible. We've trebled the number of day school places in 20 years. And something extraordinary happened for 60 years, year on year, from 1945 to 2005. We were declining numerically as a community. In 2005, that turned around. And we've begun to grow slowly, but we are growing. So we are really the first generation in the history of Anglo-Jewry whose children know more than us about Judaism, and whose grandchildren will know more still. And this is it's an achievement of the whole community.
And that's probably the most important contribution that your 22 years has made. That you cherish that very much, don't you?
I think it's incredibly important. Confucius, who wasn't Jewish but probably ought to have been,
yes,
said, if you plan for a year, plant rice. If you plan for 10 years, plant a tree. If you plan for a century, educate a child. And we have always put education at the very top of our priorities. And I am proud of the community of people who have built the schools, of parents who have sent their kids to those schools, and above all of the children themselves who fill me with pride every time I go into one of those schools.
What about a lot of people write about this a lot and so on. You did an article called "Why Does God Allow Terrible Things to Happen to His People?" And at the time of the tsunami, I think someone said to the Archbishop of Canterbury or something about, how can you believe in a God who permits suffering on this scale? What's your explanation of suffering?
I think God is within us, not outside us. And obviously there are times in our history, at the very dawn of our history, when he intervened in history to liberate our people from slavery. But God is a parent and he gives us the freedom to be ourselves. But he teaches us. God is a teacher. He teaches us how we should act. And he is inside us. He gives us the strength to overcome every catastrophe. And somehow, that's something Jews have learned. We've suffered, I think, more than most people over the last several thousand years, never more so than in the Holocaust. And what an extraordinary story from General Shkedi just now, that in Wannsee, where they actually sealed the final solution, condemning all Europe's 11 million Jews to death. The Jews gathered there all these years later and said, in effect, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people still lives. So we don't try and explain tragedy away. We don't say, why did this happen? Least of all do we say, what is God punishing us for? We say, what then shall we do? And God gives us the strength to save life, to rebuild shattered lives. And somehow or other, Jews have come through every tragedy, not looking back, but looking forward.
That's crucial, isn't it? Yes. Not looking back, looking forward. And I mean, in terms of people's looking ahead and praying and so on, what is your message to people who tried to join a synagogue or whatever and have just somehow not been able to encompass the faith and so on, and so they're a reluctant atheist, reluctant agnostic. What do you say to them?
I say to them, come after the service and enjoy the whiskey. And then if they enjoy the whiskey and the fish balls, we say, listen, you can pray beforehand and you'll enjoy the whiskey even more.
That's great. That's absolutely. And as you look back on your life so far, and we've got more to talk about, but if you had your time so far over again, is there anything you would do differently?
I always say, somebody once asked me what it's like being Chief Rabbi, is it what you expected? And I said, the greatest kindness God ever does for us is he never lets us know in advance what we're letting ourselves in for. So I never second guess the past. Of course, any one of us and any leader certainly will always make mistakes. You learn from those mistakes, you apologize, you make amends, you try and do better next time. But I've never said, what would I do if I had my life over again? I would say, here is this one life that God has given us. What am I going to do tomorrow? Not what should I have done yesterday.
That's right. Whenever people ask me my favourite interview, I always say the next one, because that's the most interesting thing. You are the next one. You are my next one.
Who have you got lined up next, David?
Don't know.
I mean, we're all retiring now. You know that.
Yes.
I became the first Chief Rabbi to retire before 70. Then Rowan Williams decided he was going to retire before 70. Then the Pope retired.
Yes.
I said to Rowan, what do you think, Rowan? We've started a fashion. He said, yeah, I know, and I'm worried about the Dalai Lama next. Actually, it turned out to be Alex Ferguson instead, but no.
And 4 days later, David Beckham as well.
Yeah, indeed.
They're all catching on, catching on in the same way. But the loneliness is one of the things he's written about often, that loneliness, that Christianity, Judaism, faith can deal with the problem of loneliness, that loneliness is the worst, like solitary confinement, I mean, is the worst, one of the worst problems of life, yeah?
Absolutely, and Genesis 1, chapter 1 begins with God saying, let there be, and there was, and God saw that it was good, and 6, 7 times we read the word good. And it's fascinating to note where the words not good first appear. It's not good for man to be alone. And as a result, in Judaism, you're actually never alone. There was one time, I have to say this, happened before I was a rabbi, because I don't want it to sound bad, but we were living in a very, very Jewish neighborhood. And I said to Elaine, all those decades ago, wouldn't it be nice to go somewhere where no one recognizes us, somewhere where there are actually no other Jews? So we found a little hotel in the middle of the countryside, and when we got there, we discovered that it was full of all the Jews who wanted to get away from all the other people. We spent 48 hours avoiding eye contact. So you are never alone in Judaism. Somehow, all the things that in some other faiths people do individually, in Judaism we do together. So in some faiths you confess very privately in a confessional. In Judaism, we confess on the Day of Atonement out loud in public. We have sinned, or at least you probably have, something like that. So, whatever we do as Jews, we do together.
Fascinating. In 1980, or in the early 1980s, Chief Rabbi, there were 2,500 marriages conducted in United Synagogues, and now the figure apparently is down from 2,500 to 320. What effect will that have?
No, the marriages are actually increasing. I know that because to show each couple that we care about them and that they are special, I actually handwrite a card to every single Jewish couple who get married under my auspices. And I can always tell by the height of the pile, are we going down or are we going up? I think Jews are rediscovering the beauties of marriage. And I think somehow marriage needs consecration. It needs that air of sanctity to feel that you are pledging yourself to something bigger than yourself. It takes a village to raise a child, is the African proverb, but sometimes it takes a community and a tradition to sustain a marriage. So I think marriage, after having had this dip, is coming back in the Jewish community, and marriages are very joyous things.
How do you see the relationship between Orthodox and Reform developing in the next few years?
We had 15, 16 years ago one of those moments, you're in the plane and the pilot says, fasten your safety belts, turbulence ahead. We had a certain amount of turbulence about 16, 17 years ago. And I felt very strongly that we can't continue to behave like this, that we are one very small people, and every one of us, whether we're Orthodox or not Orthodox, whether we're religious or not religious, every one of us is precious in the eyes of God, so let every one of us be precious in one another's eyes. And I formulated 2 principles which have, I think, allowed us to work really well together ever since. Number 1, on all matters that affect us as Jews, regardless of our religious differences, let us work together. regardless of our religious differences. Number two, on all issues that touch on our religious differences, let us agree to differ, but with respect. And as a result of that, we've worked together across the board, across all the denominations, in wonderful cooperation on welfare, on fighting anti-Semitism, on interfaith relations, on standing up for Israel. And we have one of the best relationships across the denominations of any community I know in the whole Jewish world. And I think that, you know, it took that shock to the system all those years ago to say, no, we can't carry on like this, we've got to find a new way. And I think Jews have too many enemies out there. For heaven's sake, let none of us be an enemy to a fellow Jew.
How has the job changed from when it was founded back in the 19th century, the job of Chief Rabbi? And what changes have you made to the job that will be inherited by your successor?
Well, in the 19th century, nobody really knew what a Chief Rabbi was, you know. And I have a picture in my office of the Chief Rabbi of the first part of the 19th century, Solomon Herschel. And it's a Punch cartoon, I think, and it says underneath, High Priest of the Jews. I said very little has changed, except now the Chief Rabbi is the scapegoat instead of the High Priest, but otherwise the same principle. But the thing is that every generation generates new ways of communicating the message. So we were very early in using internet. We were very early in using music and CDs. We're now, the choir that you've heard singing.
Yes.
We did a little YouTube video a few years ago, which has had 1.75 million hits. And not even the choir has that many close relatives. So, you know, so we're using the social media, we're tweeting, we're Facebooking, and doubtless we're flickering, only I'm not sure about that. So we're trying always, whenever there's a new medium, I always ask my team in the office and the team in the United Synagogue, how can we use this new technology to touch more people in more creative ways?
And, yeah, absolutely. And in addition, I mean, did you predict that your job would involve as much work as a politician, as a theologian?
I never anticipated this at all. I'll tell you how it happened. It happened in 1993. I was already 2 years into the Chief Rabbinate. If you remember, in 1993, in March, a terrible crime happened. A young 4-year-old boy called Jamie Bulger was killed by 2 10-year-old boys. And there were shockwaves went right through the country. I wrote an op-ed for the Times. And the next day we got a phone call from 10 Downing Street. John Major was Prime Minister at the time. And they said, would the Chief Rabbi please come around? The Prime Minister would like to talk to him. And that's how that relationship began. I went into 10 Downing Street. I sat down opposite John Major. And he said to me, Jonathan, what should I do about crime? I think I said, be against it, Prime Minister. But that was the first of many very close friendships with other politicians, yeah, on all of all parties.
But also politics within Judaism and so on. That sort of politics as well.
That kind of politics we've always had, believe you me. This is very, you know, other people have conversations, we have rows, broigus is machlokas. We have got more words in Hebrew for an argument than you can possibly even think of. Everyone argues with everyone else. I mean, for heaven's sake, you know, Abraham argues with God, shall all the judge of all the earth not do justice? Moses argues with God, why have you done it? I think God actually chose the Jewish people because he loves a good argument.
That's a great point forward. I suppose that well, what, on a piece of paper in your desk, what little bit of helpful message will you leave for your successor?
For my successor?
Yeah.
3 things. Number 1, don't read the newspapers.
Right. Yes.
Number 2, have a sense of humour.
Yeah.
And number 3, marry a good woman. And you're ahead. You'll get all the way.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. He'll be very grateful for that. But extremely grateful for that. How would you
Mind you remember what John F. Kennedy said when he got in? He said the worst thing about going into the White House was when we got there, we discovered that things were as bad as we said they were.
Yes, that's right. Yes. A great line. I remember that line when he uttered it. That was great. What are the most promising traits or trends in society today? Or do you think society, I mean, there's things going on that, well, take one example. I mean, you've come out very strongly against same-sex marriage. What to you is the serious danger of that if it goes through? Are we on the
Look, I
road
have not
to hell?
come out strongly on that. I have said that in Judaism we don't do it. But I have not come out strongly, and let me be very clear on this, David. I know that we have in the Jewish community gays and lesbians who feel very, very shunned by the community. And I simply will not be part of that. I know that homosexuals were sent to the concentration camp, as were Jews. And therefore I will not allow any intolerance towards that in our synagogues. And I sat down 20 years ago with the Jewish gays and lesbians, and the encounter that we had was one of the most moving I've ever had. They said to me, we know, Chief Rabbi, you cannot give a blessing to our lifestyle, and we are not asking you to. But we do ask you not to be insensitive, not to have your rabbis be unnecessarily hurtful in what they say in public. And please, could we have access to pastoral support if we need it? And I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful encounter, and I've cherished that relationship ever since. We have a strongly defined sexual ethic in Judaism. It's more than 3,000 years old. But we do not seek to impose that on society as a whole. And I think religion should never seek to impose their view on society as a whole. And when you cannot buy into every single one of the elements of a faith, then buy into those that you can buy into. And therefore, we welcome everyone. Some people will not be able to keep those laws, others will not be able to keep other laws. But in the United Synagogue, we believe in holding the door open to everyone and leaving judgment to God, who does it much better than we do.
What about Israel in the sense that obviously when Israel is on the right track and so on, it's very easy to praise them and so on and so forth. But how have you defined your duty when you think Israel is doing a wrong thing or an evil thing? Many people would say, take for instance, I think it was 2009, wasn't it, Gaza, where you had 1,300 civilian and other deaths on one side and 13 on ours and so on. How do you deal with that situation? As a moral leader, you obviously can't endorse things that you don't believe are right, but you have to deal with that in a rather tactful way, or?
David, let me be very straight with you. Israel would not fire one rocket, one missile, one bullet against any Palestinian if they had not been attacked by Palestinian missiles from Gaza, innocent civilians in Sderot, having to live their entire lives in fear of some rocket that may take them or their child? Would you live in a situation where your children, even in kindergarten, had day after day after day for months to go down into bomb shelters when every day you know your life is on the line? And would a single innocent civilian have suffered in Israel's campaign against Gaza if innocent civilians had not been used by Hamas as human shields? Now these are two horrendous...
The numbers are hugely suggesting that it was a slaughter. 1,347 versus 13.
1,300 people died in Gaza. I don't know how many tens and hundreds of thousands of civilians died as a result of the Western campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I don't see the same moral odium attaching to the West. The West fully understands. And I think we have to be blunt here. Israel is the country that for 65 years has sought peace with its neighbors, and every single time it has made a significant sacrifice for peace, it has been punished by its neighbors. After 93, the handshake on the White House lawn, the Oslo process, 94, the Palestinians began their campaign of suicide bombing. 2000, Israel pulled out of Lebanon and were rewarded by Hezbollah gathering a most enormous arsenal of missiles, which eventually rained down on the north of Israel in 2006 for 34 consecutive days. Israel pulled out in 2005 from Gaza and was rewarded with the missiles hitting Sderot and then Ashkelon and then Ashdod, and more recently in Tel Aviv, where two of my brothers work, and they also have to go down now to bomb shelters because of Hamas missiles from Gaza. Every time Israel makes a significant gesture towards the Palestinians for peace, the Palestinians respond by attacking Israel. What can Israel do if its neighbors checkmate themselves every time they hold out their hand of peace? Now, these are difficult moral dilemmas. And believe you me, there is not one Israeli soldier or any single individual I have ever met in the Israeli Foreign Service or its intelligence division who enjoys any of this. We're a people who hold life sacred. But if only those around us would do likewise, all the children in the region would have a future, would have hope. And therefore, let us be unceasing in our offer to all the people of the Middle East. Let us work together to make our children have a better tomorrow than they have today.
Wouldn't it be possible, for instance, to have done more to help the peaceful Palestinians, not necessarily members of Hamas, but I mean those people who are trying to build up a...
100%. 100%. Israel has some pretty peaceful Palestinians on the West Bank. The West Bank economy has been growing between 7 and 10% every year since the Oslo process. Israel does help the Palestinians. Secondly, members of our community have set up in Ramallah and tried to set up in Gaza a microloan project to help Palestinians build their own new businesses and create an economic roadmap to peace. And Israel has done everything it can to do just that. But I think the real clincher came from the former head of the Saudi Arabian Navy, writing in the Times last November, who said, for all the world to see, don't the Palestinians realize they have more rights in Israel than they have in any other country in the Middle East?
And that was a Saudi Arabian.
Well, look, Israel is the only place in the Middle East where a Palestinian can get up and on national television criticize the government and be a free man the next day. And that is quite something. I also find it quite difficult, David, to see some of the churches criticizing Israel. I understand them, but do they not understand that Israel is the only place today in the Middle East where it is safe to be a Christian?
In this context, where did anti-Semitism start? Who invented anti-Semitism?
Don't know, actually. It's been around a long time. The first real recorded anti-Semite was a gentleman called Haman in the Book of Esther, who clearly didn't like salt beef sandwiches or something or other. But he said there is this one people whose laws are different from any other people. So that very first statement, recorded statement of anti-Semitism, is, I think, also the most revealing, because it says that anti-Semitism is the key example of dislike of the unlike. Jews were different. In medieval Europe, they were the only significant group who weren't Christian. In today's Middle East, they are the only significant country that isn't Muslim. So Jews were hated because they were different. And you'll say, well, look, everyone is different. And I agree with you, but Jews were the only people who consistently throughout history stood up for the right to be different, for the duty to be different, for what I call the dignity of difference. They were the only minority group who throughout the centuries refused to assimilate to the dominant culture or convert to the dominant faith. So that is why I don't see anti-Semitism as a crime just against Jews. I see it as a crime against humanity, because difference is what makes life sacred. Because each of us is different, each of us is irreplaceable. And if that is the case, then a world that has no room, or any country or any society that has no room for Jews, has no room for difference, has no room for humanity. And that is why I say anti-Semitism is a crime. Not just against Jews, but against humanity. Anti-Semitism begins with Jews, but it never ends with Jews.
Chief Rabbi, this has been a really special occasion for me, and the time's rocketed by, and I just want to say that it's been a real privilege to have this conversation, and please, for God's sake, keep on this refreshing attitude to the world that you have through every year of your hopefully only semi-retirement.
Thank you. And Sir David. Thank you so much for this evening. Thank you so much for all you've given this country. And did anyone ever tell you you do a wonderful Michael Sheen imitation?